I found out I wasn't invited to my son's wedding. One envelope changed everything forever. I found the wedding invitation in my daughter-in-law's purse. Cream cardstock, gold foil lettering. A date circled in red on the little calendar magnet stuck to the fridge. My name was nowhere on it. Not on the envelope. Not on the guest list taped to the inside of the cabinet door. Nowhere. I am 72 years old, and I raised that groom by myself after his father left us with nothing but unpaid bills and a broken washing machine, and somehow I had become invisible in his life. But before you decide whether I'm the villain of this story or the woman who finally stood up for herself, stay with me. Because there's a second envelope in this story. One that nobody expected, and it changes everything. If this story pulls you in, do me a favor and hit that like button right now, and subscribe if you haven't already, because I have so many more stories like this one to share with you. And I would love to know, where are you watching this from tonight? Are you curled up on your couch after a long day? Are you listening in your car? Are you in bed with your phone propped against a pillow? Tell me in the comments where you're from, because I read every single one, and it means the world to an old woman like me to know people all over the world are listening to my story. My name is Christiana. I want to tell you exactly how I found that envelope and exactly what I did about it, because I think a lot of you have lived some version of this story too, the mother who gave everything, and the family who decided somewhere along the way that she didn't matter enough to include. I was 30 years old when my husband walked out. My son was 6. I remember standing in the kitchen of our little rental house, holding a stack of bills in one hand and my son's hand in the other, and thinking I have two choices. I can fall apart or I can figure this out. I chose to figure it out. I worked 2 jobs for the better part of 15 years. I was a receptionist at a dental office during the day, and 3 nights a week I cleaned offices downtown after everyone else had gone home. I remember pushing a vacuum cleaner across empty hallways at 11 o'clock at night, so tired my hands would shake, thinking about my son asleep at the neighbor's house because I couldn't afford a babysitter who charged by the hour past dinner time. I never remarried. People used to ask me why, and I would just smile and change the subject, but the truth is I didn't have room in my life for anyone else. Every ounce of energy I had went into that boy. I packed his lunches. I helped him with his homework at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee going cold beside me. I sat in the bleachers at every single baseball game he ever played, rain or shine, because I promised myself he would never look up into the stands and see an empty seat where his mother should have been. When he graduated high school, I sold the only piece of jewelry I owned that was worth anything, my grandmother's ring, so I could help him with his first semester of community college. I told him it was a gift I'd been saving. I never told him what I gave up for it. That wasn't the kind of mother I wanted to be, the kind who makes her sacrifices into currency, who cashes them in later for guilt. I wanted my love to be quiet, unconditional, the kind that doesn't keep score. He grew into a good man, or at least I believed he did. He got a stable job in logistics. He was kinda strangers. He called me every Sunday for years, not every week eventually, but every Sunday for a long, long time. And when he told me he'd met someone, I was thrilled for him. Genuinely thrilled. I didn't have a single bad thought in my heart. I'll be honest with you, watching your only child fall in love with someone else is a strange kind of grief. Even when it's happy, you spend your whole life being the center of someone's world, and then one day you're not, and that's exactly how it should be. That's healthy, that's life working the way it's supposed to. I understood that. I welcomed it. His fiancée was polite to me in the beginning. A little distant, but polite. She had her own family, her own traditions, her own ideas about how things should be done, and I respected that. I never tried to insert myself into their relationship. I never criticized her cooking or her taste in furniture or the way she planned things. I kept my opinions to myself because I remembered what it was like to be a young woman building a life, and how exhausting it is when an older woman hovers over every decision like a storm cloud that never quite breaks. But over time I started to notice things. Small things at first. I wasn't invited to a housewarming party. My son said it had been a small gathering, just a handful of close friends, nothing personal. I wasn't told about a promotion until 3 weeks after it happened, and I found out through a mutual acquaintance at church, not from him. Sunday phone calls became once a month. Once a month became a text message on my birthday. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that this is simply what happens when children grow up and build their own lives. They pull away, it's natural, it's healthy. Don't be one of those clingy, bitter old women who can't let her child breathe. I repeated that to myself so many times I nearly believed it. Then came the engagement. And then came the wedding planning. And then came the day I let myself into his house. I still had a key from years ago, back when I used to water his plants when he traveled for work, because his fiancée had asked me to drop off a casserole dish I'd borrowed the week before. I set the dish on the counter, and that's when I saw her purse sitting open on a chair, and the corner of cream cardstock peeking out. I want to be honest with you. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But something in me, some old tired instinctive part of a mother's heart, told me to look, and I did. It was a wedding invitation. Their wedding invitation. Elegant, formal, printed with a guest list attached on a separate card, the kind you use to keep track of RSVPs. I scanned it, at first just admiring the design, and then my stomach began to sink as I realized I was looking for my own name and not finding it. I checked twice. 3 times. I checked the family section, where it listed the parents of the bride and groom. My son's father was listed. A man who hadn't spoken to him in 25 years. A man who never paid a dime of child support. A man who missed every graduation, every birthday, every single milestone of that boy's life. His name was on that card. Mine was not. I want to describe to you what that felt like because I think words often fail when we try to explain heartbreak, but I'll try. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from under 25 years of my life. Every sacrifice, every missed opportunity for myself, every night I went without so he could have, all of it seemed to collapse into that one small omission. My name missing from a piece of cardstock. I didn't cry right away. I actually just stood there in his kitchen, holding the casserole dish lid in my hand, staring at that invitation like it might rearrange itself if I looked hard enough. Eventually I set it down exactly where I'd found it, careful not to disturb anything, and I let myself out of the house the same way I'd let myself in, quietly, invisibly, the way I apparently existed in my son's new life. I drove home and I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone. I sat with it. I let myself feel the full weight of it because I think there's a kind of grief that deserves to be felt honestly before you decide what to do with it. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into the hallway closet and pulled down an old shoebox where I kept photographs. Actual printed photographs, from back before everyone had a phone full of digital pictures. I sat on my bedroom floor and went through every single one. Him as a baby, bald and red-faced and screaming in a hospital blanket. Him at 5 missing his front teeth, grinning up at a camera I'd bought secondhand. Him in his cap and gown, one arm around my shoulders, the other holding up a diploma like a trophy. Him as a grown man at his college graduation, hugging me so tight he lifted me clean off my feet. I sat there for hours, and somewhere in the middle of that grief something in me shifted. Because I realized, I wasn't just mourning being left off a guest list. I was mourning the version of my son I thought I knew. The boy who used to tell me I was his hero. Somewhere between then and now, he had become a man who could let his mother be erased from the most important day of his life, and either didn't notice or worse, agreed to it. I want to tell you something about myself that might surprise you. I am not a woman who screams. I am not a woman who makes scenes. In 72 years, I have learned that the loudest reaction is rarely the most effective one. So I did not call my son in a rage. I did not send an angry text message. I did not show up at his house demanding an explanation. Instead, I did something quieter and I believe something far more powerful. I began very calmly to remove myself from every place I had been holding space in his life without being asked to. I want to explain what I mean by that because it's important. For years, I had quietly funded things I never told him about. I paid the difference on his car insurance every single month because when he was in his 20s and struggling, I'd offered to help just until you're back on your feet, and it simply became a habit that never stopped 12 years later. I still paid it. I had never once mentioned it to him as an adult. It was simply something I did out of love without asking for credit. I also held in my name an old storage unit filled with furniture and heirlooms that had belonged to my late mother. Furniture I had always intended would go to him one day. Pieces I had been storing and paying for nearly a decade, waiting for the day he had a home big enough and stable enough to receive them properly. And I was, without him fully realizing it, the emergency contact and secondary signer on a small savings account his grandmother, my own mother, had left specifically for him to be used as she'd written in her own hand, when he starts a family of his own. I had been the steward of that gift for 11 years since she'd passed, faithfully adding to it whenever I could, waiting for the right moment to hand it over. I did not cancel anything out of spite that night. I want to be very clear about that because I think revenge born out of a single wounded evening is rarely wise, and I did not want to become a woman I didn't recognize. Instead, over the following 2 weeks, I quietly began to formalize things that had always technically been mine to decide. I met with the woman who had handled my late mother's estate. I spoke with my own attorney, a kind man named Beaumont who had helped me with my will years earlier. I asked questions. I listened. I made no decisions in anger. I made decisions in clarity. And then I wrote a letter. I have always believed that the truest things I have to say are better written than spoken, because on paper my hands can't shake, and my voice can't crack, and nobody can interrupt me halfway through. I wrote to my son. I told him gently that I had seen the invitation. I told him I understood that families change, that priorities shift, that a wedding guest list is not a referendum on love. I told him I wasn't writing to guilt him or to demand an apology. I told him I only wanted him to know one thing clearly, that I loved him more than my own comfort, my own future, my own name on any piece of paper, for 25 years, without ever once asking him to prove that he loved me back in equal measure. Then I told him about the storage unit. I told him about the insurance payments. And I told him for the first time about the account his grandmother had left for him, and what she had written in her own hand about when it should be used. I told him I had decided, given the circumstances, that it seemed like the right time to formally transfer stewardship of that account, and to finally deliver the furniture from the storage unit, because a wedding is exactly the kind of family milestone his grandmother had been imagining. Not as a reward. Not as a bribe. Simply because it was time and because those things had never truly been mine to keep, only mine to hold until the right moment came. I put that letter, along with copies of the account documents and the storage unit release forms, into a plain envelope, and I mailed it to his house 3 days before the wedding. I didn't do it to manipulate him. I want you to understand that clearly because when I've told pieces of this story to friends, some of them assumed I was trying to guilt him into inviting me at the last minute, dangling money and heirlooms like some kind of leverage. That was never my intention. I did it because I realized, sitting on my bedroom floor that night with a shoebox of photographs, that the invitation had shown me something true. That my son and I had drifted into 2 different understandings of what our relationship was. He seemed to believe I would always simply be there. A quiet, permanent fixture requiring nothing and expecting nothing. I needed him to understand that I was a whole person with things I had given and things I could choose to stop giving, and that my presence or my absence actually mattered. He called me the evening he received the envelope. I almost didn't answer, not out of spite, but because my hands were trembling and I needed a moment to breathe first. When I finally picked up, his voice was different than I'd heard it in a long time. Smaller. Younger almost. He said he didn't understand. He said the wedding invitations had been handled entirely by his fiancée's family, that there had been a mix-up with an early guest list that was supposed to be revised, that he'd simply never checked to confirm the final version, that he had assumed, wrongly, he admitted painfully, that of course his own mother would be there, so he hadn't thought to double-check something so obvious. I want to tell you I have heard 100 excuses in my life, and I know the difference between an excuse and an explanation. This felt, to my ear and to my heart, like an explanation. Not because it excused the hurt was real regardless of the reason behind it, but because it matched the son I actually knew, a man who has never once in his life been cruel to me on purpose, only occasionally careless, the way we all sometimes are with the people who love us so reliably that we forget they need tending to. He apologized. Not a quick, deflecting apology, but a real one, the kind where the other person actually sits in the discomfort of what they did instead of rushing past it. He told me that receiving that letter, and understanding for the first time everything I had quietly been carrying and giving on his behalf for years, without a single word of it ever being spoken, had broken something open in him. He said he felt ashamed, not because I had told him about the money or the furniture, but because he realized how much of my love he had simply taken as background noise in his life, assumed and unexamined, instead of something he actively cherished and protected. He asked me to come to the wedding. Properly invited, seated with the family, my name printed correctly on the place card. Not as an afterthought. Not smoothed over at the last minute to avoid a fight. He asked his fiancée to call me herself and she did, and she was tearful on the phone, and she told me she hadn't fully understood until that week how much history and love she had been standing next to without realizing it. I want to tell you, I almost didn't go. Some small, proud, wounded part of me wanted to decline, wanted to make a point, wanted them to feel the same absence I had felt staring at that guest list. But I am 72 years old, and if there is one thing my age has taught me, it's that grudges are heavy things to carry, and I did not want to spend whatever years I have left carrying one. So I went. I wore a soft blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, and I sat in the second row, and when my son walked down the aisle and caught my eye, he didn't just glance at me the way people glance at familiar faces in a crowd. He stopped just for a moment, right there in front of everyone, and mouthed the words, "Thank you, Mom." I don't think anyone else in that room understood what those two words carried, but I did, and that was enough. The furniture from my mother's storage unit now sits in their living room. A beautiful old cedar chest, a set of hand-carved side tables, things that have been in our family for 3 generations. And the savings account, the one his grandmother left with such careful intention, became the down payment on the house they bought together 6 months later. I still pay for nothing out of guilt now. That part of me has changed for good, and I don't regret it. But I give freely, joyfully, because I choose to, and because I know now without question that I am seen, that my name means something in that family, that I am not simply a quiet, permanent fixture in the background of someone else's life, but a woman who was loved enough, and who loved fiercely enough, to finally, gently, insist on being counted. I think about that night on my bedroom floor often, surrounded by old photographs, feeling like my whole life's devotion had been reduced to an omission on a piece of cardstock. And I think about how close I came to either exploding in anger or worse, saying nothing at all and swallowing that hurt the way I had swallowed so many small hurts over the years, telling myself it wasn't worth the conflict. What I learned, and what I hope some of you take from this story tonight, is that love without boundaries eventually becomes invisible. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because I lived it, and because I nearly let it define the rest of my relationship with my only son. Sometimes the people we love the most don't neglect us out of malice. They neglect us because we've taught them, gently and over many years, that our love requires nothing back, that we will always simply be there, quiet and unquestioning, no matter how we're treated. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do for them and for ourselves is to quietly, calmly, without cruelty, remind them that we are still here, that we still matter, and that our love, however patient, was never meant to be taken for granted. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever given everything and wondered whether anyone noticed, I want you to know, it's not too late to remind them gently that you're still there. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is one honest letter, and the quiet courage to send it. Thank you for listening to my story tonight. If it moved you even a little, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I love hearing from all of you all over the world. Until next time, take care of yourselves and don't forget, it's never too late to remind the people you love that you're still there.